Welcome to the Great Stupa of Dharmakaya, which liberates upon seeing. This is where we will be holding our seminar, and it's very appropriate because this stupa and this being in the stupa represents the realm of non-duality, a realm beyond hope and fear, and a realm beyond life and death. So it's this timeless realm in which everything else arises. So it's a good place to look at the impermanence and how it transitions through our lives. So I'd like to welcome you in, and we'll have a little discussion. Thank you.
Welcome. We are here at Shambhala Mountain Center inside the Great Stupa of Dharmakaya. And I'm joined by Dominie Cappadonna and Joshua Mulder, who will be teaching a weekend workshop up here in November called Big Deaths, Small Deaths. And this is the fourth year they've been leading it. Dominie Cappadonna is a transpersonal psychotherapist, mentor, death awareness educator, and contemplative chaplain. Joshua Mulder has been a student of Buddhism for over 40 years, and he's the artistic director of the Great Stupa of Dharmakaya. So I'm honored to be joined by you two here. Thank you.
Thank you, Travis.
And maybe to begin with, a sort of basic but huge point to discuss is that death is, in my experience, like the most obvious thing and the most abstract or difficult to actually relate to. I find that I go through most of my days ignorant of, if not like on some level actively ignoring the reality of my death. And every once in a while I wish that I could check in with it a little more, because at some point I'll have to, and maybe being more in touch with it could make my life more meaningful. So I wonder if there's anything to begin with that you may say about how we humans tend to relate to the reality of death or not, and what there is to say about that experience that we all sort of share.
It's a wonderful and astute question, Travis, and I wonder if before we respond to that, whether for those of you that have not been inside the Great Stupa of Dharmakaya, if perhaps Joshua might express how it is that this is a particularly profound place to be offering a Befriending Small Deaths and Big Deaths seminar, just so that we can build the ground and have some explanation of where we're sitting. Would that be a good place to start?
That sounds great.
All right.
What does the stupa have to do with death?
Well, most people's, I think everybody's feeling is similar to yours, is that there's sort of this grand not knowing, vagueness and uncertainty. And so our reaction to that uncertainty is either we freak out or we don't freak out. And that's a continuous process throughout your life, is that there's always change, and there's always either enthusiasm or acceptance that you're going to be in that change, or else you're going to be wary of it and sort of distant from it. And the more distant you become, the less engaged you are actually in your life, and less life you have, because the less appreciation you have for the vividness and vitality of that change. So we can just quickly show I think this is what Dominie. So this is the stupa from the inside. we looked a little bit on the outside. So this is the realm of non-duality, realm of space. And it's a composite of 5 different elements, which is the square part is the element of earth, round is water, the spire is fire, wind is this, and then space at the very top. And so you're going from the most dualistic element to the least dualistic element. And so the bottom here is sort of like self and other, the basic duality. And the ground is the hardness of the earth and the solidity that we think we exist in. But that comes from this emotional realm, this watery realm of internal lymph system, digestive system, all these sort of watery emotions. And in the fire element is the core value, your love, your compassion. And the wind element is your breath, that you, the more subtle, just subtle body breath. And then that dissolves into space. So this is the way that at the time through life is you're very engaged in physicality, then your emotions and your core values, then you're breathing, and then you have the last 3 breaths traditionally, and then you pass into this realm of space. So it's a composite of these 5 elements which make up our psyche in our bodies, and just a reference to how it actually dissolves into space at the end of life. And that every moment we're in this realm of space, and that we recreate the world over and over again every second. In our dreams, we go to sleep, and then we recreate our emotion, and it becomes a very real world. And then we wake up and we're back in an open space. And then it happens over again. Every moment it happens. So being familiar with this process makes it more accommodating, makes your whole life more accommodating to change. And then you actually embrace and are enthralled by death or impermanence or change. You're invigorated by it rather than freaked out by it.
I'd like to add just a piece to what Joshua has shared to set some ground that will then, I think, really hold your question well. And Joshua, my sense is that the way we live and learn and teach, if we were to say it in an essential or pith way, might be a description from one of our beloved teachers who reminds us in this way. And the expression is, like waves in the sea, all things are impermanent. I will accept whatever occurs, whatever happens, and make it my friend. And so this act of befriending, which actually is a Quaker word, this act of befriending is spoken of in many different traditions. In Buddhist practice, we sometimes call that feeding your demons practice or handshake practice. And it's based on the natural transformation of our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations, held with a quality of noticing, accepting, and resting. And so the basis of befriending and the basis of responding to your question about death is one that we hold with this noticing, accepting, and resting, so that that can already provide a quality of both tenderheartedness and a quality of relaxation. And more specifically, I'd love to respond to your question, because in the West, very classically, we've had a culture of denial of death, and that's rapidly changing with the tsunami of boomers. It's called the Silver Tsunami, and the boomers are really revolutionizing the whole field of death and dying. Although, in an interesting way, there's only one book of the thousands of books that have been written on death and dying that talk about the non-finite or small death. And a small death is a death that doesn't kill us. It's a death that we live through. And so in our daily life, our small deaths are ones that sometimes, Travis, can feel so close to us that it's a little like how close our Buddha nature is, or our true nature is, or our secret undamaged self is. We tend to not look at it. Or a small death can be quite painful. Small does not diminish the pain. It just suggests we live through it. So we might deflect or ignore a small death because it's painful. And so that might begin to respond to your question about the ignoring in our daily life. Befriending and naming small deaths really matters, because anything that can be named, we have a way to empower healing, to clarify, and to be able to rest more easily with a small death. And I'd love to name some small deaths. How is that for you?
That sounds good. So if I may just kind of share what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Was that acknowledging smaller deaths in our life, like I may name a couple, are a relationship ends, we move from one town to another, like maybe a gathering of friends having tea ends. I think that I could quite easily kind of coast through some of these, but then maybe acknowledging, oh, this is something that has come together, was enjoyed, and now it's passing. The more that we mark, oh, this is passing, this is passing, this is passing, and the reality that everything that comes together in our lives is going to pass becomes more real, which kind of disturbs that state of ignorance, maybe.
Exactly. And what you're pointing to is exactly what we want to explore in our seminar, which is that all small deaths are practice points. And you've brought up a very subtle one about pouring tea. And I might just widen the kinds of small deaths and notice for yourself, if you feel to see which ones are most prominent. So a small death might be a loss of security and safety, a loss of security at home or on a highway, in wilderness, in extreme sports, in a natural disaster like the Colorado floods. So a small death with the Colorado floods might be that you've lost your home, or it's been damaged and you've lost your possessions, but you've lived through it. Another kind of small death is, just as you've mentioned, Travis, it's relational. So that might be the loss of a beloved, the loss of a pet, the loss of first love, something that really grips us. Another kind is a loss of justice in the world, where you might feel discriminated against through gender or through race, or through a structural oppression at work. Another kind of small death is found in the existential sense of loss of meaning and great anguish for what's arising of suffering in the world. And another is loss of worth and value through perhaps retiring, and also through an illness or a disease process where you may not feel as capable as once you did. And the question can arise, do I matter? Can I make a difference? So these are examples of practice points in our daily life.
So at this point, maybe we could say something about the big death, which is, okay, I can reasonably try to feel my way through the ending of a relationship or this and that.
Yes.
But then at some point, the heart's going to stop. I won't be able to breathe anymore.
That's
the
right.
heart's going to stop. And so what can you say about how we may begin to even imagine that event and then approach and go through that event, in a way that's not just terrifying, horrible, but maybe in a positive way? What is like a wakeful or brave or enlightened approach to that process? And I wonder if you could say anything about what actually, what happens at that point.
All right, and Joshua and I will both respond to that. Maybe I'll begin, Joshua, and just see, what arises here. The most enlightened and brave way to approach our big death, which would be the finite death at the end of our life, is through preparation now. Every wisdom tradition speaks to that. And there are wonderful daily practices for preparation. As an example, in the Buddhist tradition, a great book is called Preparing to Die by Andrew Holacek. In the secular and in larger traditions, regardless of your paradigm of belief, a book called What Really Matters by Karen Wyatt. And so one way to prepare for the end of life is practice, practice, practice. Whether that's a meditative practice and practices that include, of course, life reviews and forgiveness practices, ways of practically practicing with creating advanced directives, all those small steps at all ages, because we die at all ages. So all those steps really help us to approach the very end. And toward the end, creating a circle of friends and family that can hold the ground for you is very, very important. Hospice care, there are all manner and means of support, because it takes a village in our days when we're approaching quite closely. Let me just check, and maybe Joshua wants to add to that, and then I'll leapfrog to the moment of our death. Joshua, anything you feel to add?
I think we're going to try to do a lot of somatic modalities, a lot of body-centered, felt practices that will engage people at different levels, but there'll be something that they can activate their own emotions, their own feelings, and express those in the world or feel those fully. And that is this creates a memory in your body, and also relaxation in your body, that you're actually addressing these issues. And when you address them, then your body can actually relax and open up to that. Even though there's no, you said, is there a nice way of doing this? And we'll try to make it nice, but it's not always nice. But it's effective and emotive, and we're trying to connect to reality, basically. Mm-hmm. And we have different processes that we'll go through to do that.
Yes. And some of these processes are ones of release, where we're naming those things that have been difficult for us, and we release those. So we work a lot in nature. So we'll have nature practices and shamanic practices and Buddhist practices, and that fills out, I think, a bit what Joshua is speaking of.
Which is, you two are now referencing what happens over the course of like a weekend
That's right.
workshop, which relates to
That's right,
like,
Travis,
how to
thanks.
even like approach the death. Well, there's practice we can do now.
Exactly.
And these are the sort of things that we
Yes.
work with in.
So one evening we'll actually create a space in which someone will die. Everybody will die. So we'll go through that whole process of dissolution of these elements into space. So the physical, emotional, heartfelt, breath, all these things will sort of, the duality will come into a non-duality point and a transition point. So that's that'll be a long, like an hour and a half process of doing that in this space.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a acting out that whole process. A little theater.
Yes.
He's sort of referring to, acting out the moment of death, which maybe you wanted to say a little bit.
Yes, right, because in our teaching we'll emphasize the subtle body dissolution after we die. And yet I want to respond to your question about the moment of death. And also to respond to you about the scary part of dying. Even with preparation, there is within us this life force that's very instinctual, and it can pop up with a lot of fear, regardless of how practiced we are. So if you're with someone who's dying and they appear fearful, simply know and be able to embrace that that's bound to come up through the body. And in fact, that's called terminal agitation. And we anticipate that. And there's no problem with that. We just open our arms and give a lot of space to those moments. And then at the moment of death, what happens physiologically is what you began to say. Our heartbeat ceases, brain waves cease to be detected, we're unresponsive, the EEG is flat, and there are other markings of the actual, what we would call a Western or medical death. What we're emphasizing, of course, in the hour and a half, we take the whole Saturday night for a guided visualization where we're being with the subtle dissolution of the elements that happen after our physical death stops. And that journey is accompanied by cello and Tibetan bells. So it's a very beautiful way to relax into the experience. And in fact, actually, we've been offering this teaching for 4 years, and in the very first teaching, a medical doctor who was close to death called us from Oklahoma and said, I'm dying and I want to learn how to die. May we come. I'll bring my oxygen, my transfusions. I know how to live through this experience, but will you help me know how? And he came with his wife, and after that evening practice, he said, I feel so prepared. Thank you so much. And then he died within a month after our seminar. So that was the most profound, actual practice. So it's a very profound teaching, both within what we offer, and certainly there are other practices that help. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing in this space and for offering to lead a longer weekend workshop. I know this is it's a huge area to explore, but also one that maybe a lot of folks, maybe even medical doctors, may like go through most of their lives without like touching in on or
Yes.
like where to even start with this sort of thing.
Exactly.
So,
Travis.
so at least like hearing conversations like this is at least like a turning attention towards it, and then
Yeah.
the weekend workshop a little bit more full. So I'll be looking forward to
Yes.
that, as I'm sure a lot of people will.
And I just want to piggyback with that to say that often healing professionals come, doctors, nurses, hospice workers, as well as a range of people from 18 to 80. And we fine tune, it's important to us that we're really matching what your individual needs are. So please look for a questionnaire on the website and video and make out the questionnaire, because we sculpt the processes we do both here in the stupa and out in nature based on your needs. Thank you. Thank you, Travis.
You're welcome. Any closing?
I'd just like to recommend that if you are dying, or if you are with somebody who is dying, that you relax and that you're curious, and that you're open to whatever arises.
Yeah.
It's about,
Yeah.
and you'll find it good news rather than bad news.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Great. Well, thank you, and look forward to hosting anybody who's watching. Thank you for tuning in to begin with, and we'd be so glad to host you if you feel inspired to come explore this further this November 2015, Befriending Big Deaths and Small Deaths with Dominie, Cappadonna, and Joshua Mulder. So I suppose a small death is about to happen right now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.